Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Legionaries of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 335 and we're covering Ganymed Spes 54 to 56 on growing cultural consciousness. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday, we started this chapter and we talked about defining culture and understanding how each differs as we all live in a culture. Today, we're continuing chapter 2, the proper development of culture, and we're covering all of section 1, the circumstances of culture in the world today. And the summary of this section is that cultures are changing due to globalization and technology. We need to be more aware we can make culture and need to do it well. So, paragraphs 54 and 55 do not have subparagraphs. So, 54, the summary is cultures are changing due to the modern development of man. Let's read 54. The circumstances of life of modern man have been so profoundly changed in their social and cultural aspects that we can speak of a new age of human history. New ways are open, therefore, for the perfection, the further extension of culture. These ways have been prepared by the enormous growth of natural, human, and social sciences, by technical progress, and advances in developing and organizing means whereby men can communicate with one another. Hence, the culture of today possesses particular characteristics. Sciences, which are called exact, greatly develop critical judgment. The more recent psychological studies more profoundly explain human activity. Historical studies make it much easier to see things in their mutual, mutable, and evolutionary aspects. Customs and usages are becoming more and more uniform. Industrialization, urbanization, and other causes which promote community living create a mass culture from which are born new ways of thinking, acting, and making use of leisure. The increase of commerce between the various nations and human groups opens more widely to all the treasures of different civilizations, and thus, little by little, there develops a more universal form of human culture, which better promotes and expresses the unity of the human race, to the degree that it preserves the particular aspects of different civilizations. We have to look back to what the situation was in 1965. In just a few generations, human went from what they'd done for probably about 10,000 years in agriculture, farming, with some changes, but not like super dramatic changes, to first factories and then the space race and the Cold War. One of the things that's just absolutely profound to think about is that there was only 66 years between the Wright Flyer, the first manned flight, and Apollo 11, man landing on the moon. The 60 years before Vatican II, 1905 to 1965, might be argued as the most profound technological, scientific discovery advances in the history of mankind. I think our own period since the Council 1965 to 2025, has a lot. But if you look at how it has changed culture, our culture, I think, is closer to what it was in 1965 than 1965 was to 1905. This is really important when we're talking about culture and how we adapt to new cultures. And thus, the new culture, the new modern culture that they're dealing with in the 1960s, and to a large extent we still have today, will have certain characteristics. First of all, it's going to be a technocratic culture. If we look, say, the richest men in history, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, people like that, how did they become the richest men in history? By controlling the technology, by building the technology. They are amazing in that they did not start with a large majority of their wealth. Some of them did start with something, but they didn't start with like a huge amount of wealth and they didn't gain it by conquest or by shrewd business dealings. No. How did they become the richest men? They created new technologies, or they oversaw companies that created new technologies. We're not going to get into the exact distinction here. Second, we have a culture that is very evolutionary in its thinking. There are good aspects of this in the sense that we see that things are not just unchanging. We see culture can change. We see things can develop. But especially in the mid-20th century, there was a kind of Darwinism into every aspect that really looked very negatively on anything that might be problematic. And you had a lot of sterilization of the disabled and things like that going on at the time. That's when you have this all-encompassing idea of evolution. Evolution can explain a lot of things, but it can't explain everything. It's not an all-encompassing ideology, as many put forward at the time. The last major cause mentioned here is this kind of worldwide uniformity, this globalization. If we look at it today, how many people around the world have Hello Kitty from Japan and have Mickey Mouse from the United States? And there's a few other things, and watch BTS from South Korea and things like that, right? There are these things that are universal of culture. And I think this is really an opportunity for the church because she also is universal in culture, not just one specific nation. Let's move on to paragraph 55, which is about how people are more conscious about how they make culture. This is one trait where I think it existed in 1965, but it is to be expanded even more so in the 21st century. Let's read it. 55. From day to day in every group or nation, there is an increase in the number of men and women who are conscious that they themselves are the authors and the artisans of the culture of their community. Throughout the world, there is a mounting increase in the sense of autonomy as well as of responsibility. This is of paramount importance for the spiritual and moral maturity of the human race. This becomes more clear if we consider the unification of the world and the duty which is imposed upon us that we build a better world based on truth and justice. Thus, we are witnesses of the birth of a new humanism, one in which man is defined first of all by his responsibility to his brothers and to history. I noted before I read this that we have an aspect where people are more aware of how they make culture today. One of the biggest ways that's changed, and one of the biggest cultural changes I think since the 1960s, is the internet, is the kind of interconnected nature of things. As someone who is very active on the internet, active on social media, active on making this podcast, I am aware of that. I am aware of how making this podcast, how posting on X or Twitter, how writing articles is going to change culture. And it might change culture more in some other corner of the world, and not just in my backyard. Yes, I could write articles for the Dawson paper back 100 years ago. But that would just change the local environment. It wouldn't change things on the other side of the world. And with this, we also have things like increased autonomy, increased responsibility for these things. I'm a religious. I obey my superiors, but my superiors don't give me exactly post this, post that. They give me principles and they leave me with responsibility. That's how culture works today. And this idea makes us all responsible for culture because the new algorithms are not just where one or two people can gatekeep the entirety of culture. No, the fact that, more people watch this video of Hank Green or somebody else on YouTube, that's going to get more views. And that's going to mean even more people are going to be able to, are going to receive it and then watch it. And so that gives us all responsibility. And this idea of a united world comes again here. And that's an important aspect the church responds to, I think, very well. Unlike 54 and 55, which reach no subparagraphs, 56 has 7 subparagraphs, and they're all very short, like 1 or 2 sentences. So we're going to read it in 4 parts. A and B, we need to examine cultural exchange. C and D, need to harmonize technological and non-technological cultures. E and F, dealing with anti-spiritual culture. And then G, culture needs to advance. So let's read A and B about we need to examine cultural exchange. 56A. In these conditions, it is no cause of wonder that man, who senses responsibility for the progress of culture, nourishes a high hope but also looks with anxiety upon many contradictory things which he must resolve. B. What is to be done to prevent the increased exchanges between cultures? which should lead to a true and fruitful dialogue between groups and nations, from disturbing the life of communities, from destroying the wisdom received from ancestors, or from placing in danger the character proper to each people. The Council notes that different cultures have different values that at times seem contradictory, and we should work to try and find a harmony. We're going to have increased contact as we have a more globalized world, a more unified world, and that leads to more dialogue. And that in itself is a good thing. But the danger is that a lot of cultures have wisdom gained over generations. And we need to maintain that wisdom. That wisdom is not, just, we have a culture that's more technologically advanced, therefore we ignore the wisdom of this non-technological culture. No, there's a lot of wisdom in these types of things. And we should respect these other cultures, not just be like, hey, our culture is the most technologically advanced, therefore we have control. That's not the Catholic perspective. Moving on to C and D, about the need to harmonize technological and non-technological cultures. Let's read it. 56C. How is the dynamism and expansion of a new culture to be fostered without losing a living fidelity to the heritage of tradition? This question is of particular urgency when a culture, which arises from enormous progress of science and technology, must be harmonized with a culture nourished by classical studies according to various traditions. D. How can we quickly and progressively harmonize the proliferation of particular branches of study, with the necessary forming of a synthesis of them, and preserving among men the faculties of contemplation and observation which lead to wisdom? As Catholics, we need to maintain this culture and bring in technology without losing tradition. We are not Amish. We are not in this idea of rejecting all technology. Individual Catholics can choose to live in some way like that if they want to. But they cannot impose it on other Catholics, and we don't impose that as a church. And this advancing technology makes this idea of how we maintain tradition, how we maintain culture, all the more urgent. The Council here doesn't say specifically do this, do that, but notes that it's important to maintain it. It also notes the importance of harmonizing the various branches of study. And in those harmonizations, in that kind of technological harmonization, we can't lose those ideas of contemplation, of observation. Those are important. We need to have those values of observing, the values of contemplating the truth of God. Moving on to E and F, which is dealing specifically with an anti-spiritual culture. E. What can be done to make all men partakers of cultural values in the world, when the human culture of those who are more competent is constantly becoming more refined and more complex? Finally, how is the autonomy which culture claims for itself to be recognized as legitimate without generating a notion of humanism which is merely terrestrial and even contrary to religion itself? This is a challenge. How can we look at the cultural values of the world, take out the good, and not be drawn down by the bad of this materialism? Modern culture is often very materialistic, very anti-spiritual, lacks that spiritual depth. And there is this complex physical thing. We have all these different aspects, but there's not the depth of spirituality. And at times, it can even be anti-spiritual. Let's conclude with our last subparagraph today, which is G, culture needs to advance. Let's read it. 56G. In the midst of these conflicting requirements, human culture must evolve today in such a way that it can both develop the whole human person and aid man in those duties which the fulfillment are all called, especially Christians fraternally united in one human family. One thing about culture that we recognize, and that most of us have probably realized in our own lives, is that culture is not stable. Values change, cultural expression changes. We see how the styles of music change over the past 20, 30 years, however long you might remember it. And we can see even values change. If you look at the percentage of Americans or Canadians or most other developed nations who support same-sex, quote-unquote, marriage, it's changed dramatically since I was in high school. that aspect of culture has changed, and has changed for the worse because there is no such thing as same-sex marriage. That's not addressed here because it was such a non-issue at the council, they didn't specifically talk about it. But that is an issue today that we have to definitely deal with. And the church here wants to be helpful in guiding proper development, guiding this development of what culture is. That's where we as a church can be very helpful. And the other aspect of notes here is that culture is now more united, and the universal value of the church can be more helpful. We have a spiritual depth into culture that can lead to mysticism, put at the center of deep culture, and that's a very beautiful thing we as Catholics can offer to the world. Let's offer them our universal values, our universal spirituality, and our mysticism to really guide and transform cultures. This concludes today. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarChrist Spruce It and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time, monthly, or join the StarChrist Patreon. Tomorrow we'll have the next paragraph of Gaudium Spes. That will be paragraph 57 on the need to seek what is above in culture. Please join us to learn more about Vatican II, which will provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information on the podcast, like playlists for individual documents and a reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook or X.
Amen.